Let's take a look at the infratemporal fossa. From this view, we can see the mandibular branch of the trigeminal nerve V3 where it exits out of the cranium via the foramen ovale. This branch contains both sensory and motor fibers. We'll start with the sensory branches first. Here we have the auriculotemporal nerve, which supplies the skin of the temporal region. Here is the buccal nerve, which supplies sensation to the skin and mucosa of the cheeks. Next is the lingual nerve, which supplies touch sensation to the anterior two-thirds of the tongue. If we look at the beginning of the lingual nerve, we can see the chorda tympani from cranial nerve 7 hitchhike onto the lingual nerve. This travels down to provide taste to the anterior two-thirds of the tongue. We also have the inferior alveolar nerve that travels through the mandibular bone via the mandibular foramen and anteriorly through the mandibular canal. It provides branches to the lower teeth and gums. The inferior alveolar nerve gives off the mental nerve that travels through the mental foramen to provide sensation to the chin and lower lip. Now let's take a look at the motor branches of V3. Just before the inferior alveolar nerve goes through the mandibular foramen, the nerve to the mylohyoid branches off to innervate the mylohyoid and the anterior belly of the digastric. Next, we have the motor innervation for the tensor tympani and tensor veli palatini muscles. Lastly, V3 innervates the muscles of mastication, which include the temporalis, the masseter, the lateral, and the medial pterygoid muscles. The last structure I want to point out in the infratemporal fossa is the otic ganglion. It contains presynaptic parasympathetic fibers that come from cranial nerve 9 that synapse in the otic ganglion. Remember that there are no parasympathetic fibers that come from cranial nerve 5. The postsynaptic fibers travel to the parotid gland via the auriculotemporal nerve. Now let's take a look at the pterygopalatine fossa. The maxillary branch of the trigeminal nerve V2 enters the fossa posterior superiorly via the foramen rotundum. This branch contains only sensory fibers. While in the fossa, the maxillary branch gives off the zygomatic nerve, which further divides into the zygomaticotemporal and zygomaticofacial nerves. These nerves supply sensation to the skin of the lateral region of the cheek and the temple. The maxillary nerve also gives off two pterygopalatine nerves, which supply sensation to the nose, palate, tonsil, and gingiva. The pterygopalatine nerves also suspend the pterygopalatine ganglion. This ganglion receives parasympathetic fibers from cranial nerve 7 via the greater petrosal nerve as it enters the pterygopalatine fossa via the pterygoid canal. Finally, the maxillary nerve exits the pterygopalatine fossa through the inferior orbital fissure, where it then becomes the infraorbital nerve.